Hello, everyone. If you could make your way back to your seats. I think my mother is waiting on the live stream for me to talk. So we don't want to keep Mom waiting. We'll wait 2 minutes for people in the lobby. All right, I think I'll get going. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Charles. Thank you to the staff of SVA Theater for this amazing place. I want to have a little round of applause for the back of the house who sets up this flawless technology. We're very privileged to have this amazing auditorium. So welcome, everyone. I'm Terrence Masson. I'm the chair of the MFA Computer Arts program here at SVA, and I will serve as the moderator for our first discussion. And I'm going to be joined on stage by Christiane Paul, Mark Traub, and Charles. We're each going to provide our own brief introduction and opening remarks before beginning the panel discussion. And we're going to involve you in, I hope, a very active Q&A. I'm going to wrap up by 2 o'clock is the plan to get everybody a lunch. And thank you for coming. And as I said, a special thank you to all of those at home on our live streaming. So two general areas of tools that are instigating our discussions today are image generation with Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, DALL-E 2, you've heard mention of, and also written output like ChatGPT, being integrated into the Bing search engine from Microsoft. So at the risk of appearing clever, I asked ChatGPT AI to, quote, write me a funny introduction for a talk about AI in arts education. So, good morning, everyone. We're here to talk to you about AI and arts education, and I'm sure you're all excited to hear about it. But before we get into the serious stuff, I just want to say that I'm sure AI will be a great addition to arts classroom. After all, it's not like robots can be any worse at painting than a 5-year-old. So, that's not me. That's ChatGPT. I don't think we have to worry about anything so far. But, okay, my real intro. So, something I frequently tell my students is, you don't know what you don't know. And I'm just as excited as you all to be here, because that's certainly the case with today's topic. Because while AI art has been around for decades, the current tech is advancing so fast that literally not a day goes by that doesn't have something new happening significantly. So for those of you who've been around a while, if you're proudly sporting gray hair, like I am, we know that the one thing you can always count on is change. And truly disruptive change like this is especially exciting, in my opinion. So, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Arts, AI and arts education. So, once again, we'll be talking about this on the panel, but I asked ChatGPT, so let's see what they say. So, new AI image generating tools like Stable Diffusion can be bad for art education because they can create images that lack creativity and originality. AI tools can produce images that are technically accurate, but lack the unique perspective and creative expression that come from a human artist. This can lead to students relying too heavily on AI bots and tools, not developing their own creative skills. So that's why AI tools are bad in art education, according to ChatGPT. But, ask the same question, AI image generating tools like Stable Diffusion are good for art education because they allow students to explore and experiment with different artistic styles and techniques. They can also help students learn how to use digital tools and create art, as well as how to manipulate images to create unique and interesting visuals. Additionally, these tools can help students develop their own creative ideas and explore the possibilities of digital art. So there you go. We'll see how our panel agrees or disagrees with that. So, of course, it's not the first time that technology and art have clashed, and it won't be the last. When David Hockney, in his book Secret Knowledge, presented evidence that 15th century Renaissance artists used optical instruments to aid in their renderings of perspective and realism. The pushback, you probably remember, from some art historians was severe. How dare we suggest that the masters use technology to, quote unquote, cheat? And I think Mark will have some perspective on this. Camera obscuras and the like. I love this quote. Because photography, of course, we'll remember, was long outcast as automatic and sterile and mechanical, a cheat not worthy of artistic consideration. And we'll have Charles to mention that. I'm going to read this, though, because I love this. From 1901, the very dawn of photography. Fear has sometimes been expressed that photography would in time entirely supersede the art of painting. Some people seem to think that when the process of taking photographs in color has been perfected and made common enough, the painter will have nothing more to do. Yeah. So, and then coming a little more contemporary, since at least the 1960s and into the mid-80s, when the first Apple Mac and inexpensive, widely available software was made available, and my own BFA thesis advisors had the same discussions. Using a computer for your BFA is cheating. Well, Christiane and I will have some thoughts on this on the panel for sure. So, and now, AI and machine learning are the latest tools to stimulate the exact same discussions. So, to begin to understand how this works, chances are you've already seen it in action. If you've used Google reverse image search, or you just search the 50,000 random photos on your phones and search for the word bicycle, well, instantly, you're showing every picture you've ever taken, whether you know it or not, of a bicycle. How does it know that if you haven't told it? Well, that's machine learning. And I encourage my fellow techno-geeks to do some reading on those terms that Charles mentioned earlier. Generative adversarial networks, or GANs, neural networks, machine learning, and the newest diffusion technologies. But I'm not going to talk about those today. So there's an old saying that I love, that writing about music is like dancing about architecture. So I'm going to do some showing rather than telling, because I wanted to have a quick show of hands. Who has never actually played with these tools? Who's never actually created images, done ChatGPT? All right, only a few. That's pretty good, actually. I thought more people had not played around with these yet. But, yeah, say it and see it. So I asked Stable Diffusion and DALL-E to paint me. This is my prompt: 4 college professors sitting on stage in chairs together discussing AI-generated art with images behind them on a big screen. And this is what I got. Oh, I know. Well, so I did a few of these. And just a reminder to everyone, these aren't images that are found on the web that closely match the text prompts. These are images that have never been created before from the text prompts. But it is interesting from the keynote that mentioned, note the inherent bias. So why are 4 professors all middle-aged white guys? Does it know that it was me who typed that prompt? Or is it just the inherent bias of the system? And clearly ChatGPT cannot count, as I'm just reminded here. Yes, 4 college professors on stage. So, and I did want to, since we're talking about art education, I was very pleasantly surprised, but not too surprised, just this last September, when my students arrived to begin their thesis project, without even mentioning the significance, they stepped up and showed their work, which used these tools as a way of generating pre-production artwork to inspire their thesis. So these are some of their, I think, very beautiful work that are very dependent on word choice. So this was hinted at also earlier, that the prompts that you use to generate these images are very significant. So you can see the prompt at the bottom is what was used to generate these images. A bioengineered cyborg horse with mechanical skeleton, plant muscle tissue, mutated flowers, seashells, and moss on Mars. So I said, oh, it's so easy to make these beautiful images now. And I did the same thing with similar but not the same words and got something not quite as beautiful. So I'm going to lean this way on the panel. I think that it still takes an artist to make these images in large case. Yeah, I tried again. Similar prompts, not so great. So this is there. So, but my last image of this series, I did spend some time. I nuanced, I massaged, I included lensing and lighting and details, and I started getting something a little more interesting. So, but just to the point of it is iterative. It does take some creative effort. And the last one I'm going to show is, remember that that prompt, 4 college professors sitting on chairs on stage together discussing AI-generated art with images behind them on a big screen. Well, I added an additional prompt in the style of SVA alum Keith Haring. So, pretty impressive. So I'm going to pop out of my deck now, just for 2 minutes, and show maybe more for our folks at home what this process actually is, because again, dancing about architecture, I wanted to do just some live prompting and generate an image. There we go. Here we go. So, and maybe with your help. So what I thought I'd do, see how shy you are and awake are this morning. So prompts are important, and the kind of things that you need are subject matter. So let's have a subject. Let's start with an animal, person, or creature. What's the cutest thing you can think of? Let's do cute. Labradoodle, okay? So, all right. And how about an environment? Where are we? Somebody shout something out. This is like, what's that? The moon. All right, Labradoodle on the moon. And what are they doing? All right, playing chess. Playing chess. Now, the cinematographer in me, what is this going to look like? So I'll say Pixar rendering. What kind of lighting? Abstract? Oh, Rembrandt. Let's see. How about a 50 millimeter lens from above? Let's see what this does. So again, most of you, I'm pleasantly surprised, have done something like this before. And we'll see 4 different variations and what this gives us. So imagine what's going on behind the screen. Wow. So these images have never existed before. We just made those right now. That's pretty cool. And to see the variation, we could do, say, golden light. Let's see what that does. Now, the kernel is random every time, so we're not going to get the same images with golden light. We'll get 4 completely different images, hopefully, and different lighting. There we go. That's freaking magic. That's amazing. Right, we kind of, us techno geeks, we know technically how this is done, but it's still amazing. So, but I get to stand up here and have a lot of fun all day, but you get the idea. So we want to go back and start from the beginning, and we're extremely privileged to have Christiane Paul start us off on that very topic. She's going to come up next and speak about her own personal experiences with the earliest incarnations, earliest incarnations of what would come to be called AI art. So Christiane, if you'd like to come up next, we'll get you back in the deck. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much for inviting me. It's really an honor to be here. And when we're talking about AI in art education, I think in a nutshell, the most important point is to really understand the history of AI art, to understand the technologies, and to understand how AI is being used as a tool and as a medium. We are being infiltrated by AI technologies in all aspects of our society right now, and art has always been at the forefront on reflecting on that. And of course, we're encountering AI tools from surveillance to self-driving cars to applications for the elderly. So it's also very important to point out that we have so far seen a few AI winters since the Turing test and AI technologies and even neural networks were summarized by Alan Turing quite some time ago. So it's important to acknowledge that we are looking at a long, long history here. We're definitely in an AI summer now. I don't have a graph for that, but it's very interesting to note that AI winters coincided with human-computer interface summers. I do not want to get too hung up on technology, but you already heard so many terms mentioned, and I think it's very important to contextualize this a little bit, and AI practice and AI art practice. So what you're seeing in this graph on the left is one of the earliest stages, symbolic AI. So this was AI driven by heuristics and rules, basically trying to mimic the human brains, the so-called expert systems. And the phase we are largely finding ourselves in right now is the middle phase, the statistical one of machine learning. And the big switch here being that we are combining big data and data mining with statistical analysis, and that creates all of the problems that Tito Steyr has talked about, but also has some interesting side effects. I don't want to get too deeply into effective computing and other aspects of it, just using this as a background. And I think it's important to acknowledge that our perception, that our complete sensorium is being automated by AI in various categories, from vision, speech, and language to knowledge. You are encountering these technologies on a daily basis, be it in object, scene, and activity detection, in vision, speech transcription, speech to text, text to speech, in all of those different areas. And artists have been investigating these uses of automating perception and the sensorium in different ways. If we're talking about AI art and the history of AI, we have to start with Harold Cohen's Aaron, the first artificial intelligence program for art making that Cohen developed at the University of San Diego in the late 60s. It was named Aaron in the early 70s. And Cohen always saw Aaron as very much a collaboration between him and the software. Granted, a rudimentary system, but one that was very interesting in its conception. You see Aaron drawing live here at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art in the late 70s. Aaron later on would turn into more screen-based versions. You see one of them painting here. Humans, plants, flowers were really conceptualized within this system. This is another rendition. Both of these softwares are in the collection of the Whitney Museum of American Art. And I also want to highlight here that Aaron's focus was very different from the imitation game that so many of today's softwares are playing. Aaron was really focused on the line and learning to draw the line in a way that children do. In 2020, I curated an exhibition at the Sheila Johnson Design Center at the New school called The Question of Intelligence. And this exhibition was very much structured around the automation of the sensorium. I'm going to do a lightning talk of mentioning various art projects without going into too much depth. We can discuss this a little further. I'm also going to mention a few projects by Stephanie Dinkins, who will be on at a later panel. So one of the works in the show was Mimo Acton's Learning to See. And in this installation, the artist is basically training a neural network to see through data sets of the elements, ultimately, flowers, water, sky, and you have an interactive table installation where people can move around cables and cloth, and you can see how Life, the software, tries to see what it's seeing through the filter of the different elements. So very much highlighting the bias of this. Another take on seeing was Mimi Onuoha's Us Aggregated, in which she fed images to Google's reverse image search algorithm, and she started with an image of her mother that you have in the center, and arranged around it, you can see what Google found. And what this immediately highlights is a profound misunderstanding or lack of understanding of ethnicity, of femininity, of a whole cultural context that gets misrepresented here. A kind of link between seeing and speech with David Rokeby's The Giver of Names, another classic of AI art created in 1990. And here you are basically putting objects in front of a camera, which the computer analyzes and then starts riffing off of it from a verbal database. So what Rokeby's project nicely captures is the abstraction and transition from image to text. And it's super interesting to me that the current softwares are, of course, precisely reversing that, starting with the linguistic approach for image generation. There were a few chatbots in the exhibition too, such as Lynn Hirschman-Leeson's Agent Ruby, one of the classics. And once again, I want to mention a few works by Stephanie Dinkins. Her conversations with Bina 48, you may have heard of Bina, a robot, social robot created by Martine Rothblatt from the Terrasem Foundation in likeness of her partner Bina, together with Hanson Robotics. And highly problematic construct, and Stephanie Dinkins has made a commitment to visiting this robot, talking to this robot, training it on her language, and really exploring what it means for this robotic creature to learn off of the internet, of data sets that do not necessarily represent her.
Do you know racism?
Well, I actually didn't have it. It was after that.
So what I find interesting here is that racism sounds like a disease, and it's profound misunderstanding by this creature. Another project by Stephanie that was in this exhibition is not the only one, and here she really countered the big data engagement with a search engine by creating a database that was fed on one generation of African American women only, and it was really interesting to have a conversation with a small data set. What is at the core of these issues here is what Hito Style has talked about in terms of pattern recognition, and she has also written about pattern discrimination. A piece that really speaks to that, Zach Blass and Jemima Wyman's I'm Here to Learn So is currently on view at the Whitney Museum in the Refigured exhibition. And what the artists are doing here is resurrecting the infamous unhinged chatbot Tay, modeled after a millennial created by Microsoft that had to be taken off after one day because she turned into a misogynist Nazi, precisely because she was trolled by people until she became completely unhinged. And in this installation, Tay is talking back to us, talking about what we are doing to the chatbots, how human and machines interact, and how we are learning from them. In the background, you see Google Deep Dream heavily trained on data sets of puppies and kittens, hence the creepy eyes that are popping up everywhere. And the piece is also making direct connections to military softwares here and how pattern recognition functions in this context. So we have already heard a lot about GANs, and I want to highlight some of the massive shifts we have seen in recent years. So around 2014, GANs became really a playground for digital artists to work with. Generative adversarial networks, I often think about them as kind of a built-in Turing test where you train the software on a data set, then give it a task, and the internal discriminator is trying to figure out if it's good enough or succeeds. Interesting to me was that so much GAN art was purely playing an imitation game, trying to paint like Mondrian, like Picasso. Question here being, why do we ask AI to replicate what humans have already done very well, or even better? And artists have also used these softwares in very interesting ways. Another piece from the Question of Intelligence show was Mary Flanagan's Grace AI origin story, in which she trained GAN on paintings of women only, and then tasked it with creating a portrait of Frankenstein, playing with Mary Shelley's origin myth and critique of patriarchy. I also want to highlight here that GANs have a very specific aesthetic for anyone involved in this field. You know, for any curator, student of art, it's immediately recognizable. I can go into a show, say GAN, GAN, GAN. You know, the aesthetics are so obvious and are so clear that there certainly is a kind of lack of originality, as Terrence has pointed out. Finally, we have seen the much talked about shift to softwares such as DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney. And to me, this has been such a significant shift back to a linguistic model, back to a text-based model. It makes sense in terms of efficiency, but I'm really surprised that not more has been made of this shift. And here you see DALL-E reconstructing context. And I want to end by making a few comments about how pattern recognition, and as Hito Style just called it, the mean image, is really the problem, and at the same time incredibly interesting in terms of reflecting back to us our own cultural stereotypes and the data sets we're working with. Stephanie Dinkins created a project called the Okra Continuum for the exhibition Chain Reaction, currently up on Feral File, an NFT exhibition, and she's using an okra pod here as a kind of symbol of the journey from slavery to the current stage and into the future. And the backgrounds for her NFTs are generated by the text prompts you're seeing here. Some of them are fairly harmless, some of them directly hint at slavery and at racism. And it's very interesting to see what the software makes of this, and the strength of these types of AI technologies is really showing us the lowest common denominator of our cultural databases. Stephanie Dinkins also is someone who, through the AI assembly, has been working on really changing these data sets. And I think this is an area in which really important work is happening right now. And once again, I think what artists can do here is demythologize and question data sets and help create better ones. And on that note, I'll hand it over to Mark Traub, the chair of MFA Fine Arts.
Good morning, everyone. It's pretty impressive to get to share the stage with so much human intelligence today. So, let's see here. Right, we're all talking about this current moment when artificial intelligence, particularly in the form of DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, and ChatGPT, have entered public consciousness, and our understanding of where we are vis-a-vis technology and our future. It reminds me a lot of the moment when I first became really involved in what we used to call new media art. That was when Netscape popularized the internet, or when the Netscape became a tool that people used to access the web, which was the first way that lots of people started using the internet. And it seems like maybe we are, with AI, at an inflection point similar to the one that we were at as a globalizing society and world culture in 1994, 5, 6. Charles, in his introduction, identified 1839 with the simultaneous invention of photography by a couple different people. We could go back a little further to the lens, go back a little further to movable type, to the wheel and writing. Sometimes the progress of our species is so enmeshed with big technological developments that it's tempting to be a technological determinist and say that these technologies have changed us. But in any case, what interests me most about AI isn't so much the technology itself, but what we're making with them and of them, and how it's changing how we understand ourselves and what we're making this world into. Like Terrence, I had the predictable idea of asking this question of ChatGPT. I was really struck by this story in the Times, and I also heard Kevin Roos interviewed on the Daily about his experience with the ChatGPT-driven Bing interface. Sydney, he asks, maybe humans are not ready for it. Ready or not, right? But, so he's a technology reporter, very knowledgeable, and it's almost as if, despite himself, he really had the impression that that this chatbot was sentient. But he couldn't shake that feeling, and that, I think, was what was so unsettling. The version I encountered, he writes, seemed, and I'm aware of how crazy this sounds, more like a moody, manic, depressive teenager who has been trapped against its will inside a second-rate search engine. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was sentient in the way that he is sentient. So I'm going to flip back now to the early days. I'm interested in what we make of technology and how technology affects us and our culture, and particularly in what artists make with technology and how it enables, inhibits, and impacts artistic practices and our abilities as artists to share our work with audiences and to collaborate with one another, how it affects, and this is where it really connects with AI and art education, because art is famously referred to as that which cannot be taught. And as these technologies change what it means to be an artist or what we make, some of us anyway, it's really our responsibility as educators to try to figure out how to engage with that in a supportive and critical way. In my own work, I've been pretty fascinated by the ways in which technologies of simulation and virtualization have impacted how we experience what we think of as the natural world, particularly vis-a-vis landscape. And I'll just go kind of, quickly. So this is all, these are non-lens-based photographs made with, in this case, taking pictures in video games, pictures made using software by other artists, or landscapes made by other artists, and then I go in and take pictures. And these are using an Earth simulator, a kind of 3D model of the Earth that's generated with fractal algorithms. I'm just showing this so that as we have a conversation, you'll kind of know where I'm coming from. Because I'm also I'm not so much interested in this, in what we used to call new media art or art and technology, because of its technological sophistication, but also when in rare cases we can make art or pictures that are deeply impactful to us. So I guess I'm trying to show the art that I feel is, the most impactful work I can make. I then got really tired of screens and started making actual paintings that don't have any high-tech stuff involved, except for the frames. These are digitally milled out of 3D models downloaded from the internet. But I just want to quickly end with what I'm making now. I am one of those artists who's using this most recent generation of deep learning models, like DALL-E and Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, to make images. I am thinking about how these are informed by, and it has so much to do with how I choose to make the work, informed by the history of European landscape painting and also landscape photography, here made, without a lens. I'm thinking about how these technologies might enable me to imagine a future. The title of this project is Learning to Love the Future. It's meant somewhat ironically, but also sincerely, in that I want to sustain a critical engagement with all these ideas about the future that are, on the one hand, apocalyptic, like philosophers at Oxford and elsewhere who think about catastrophe scenarios and existential threats to the species and to civilization, identify artificial intelligence along with nuclear weapons, runaway climate change, and biological weaponry, or like germ leaks from labs, that kind of thing, as one of the four great threats to, one of the four great extinction threats, either to our species or to human civilization. So, AI is scary, but it also does hold a lot of promise, and I just think it's really interesting how it makes us feel, how it made Kevin Roos feel to chat with Sydney, how it brings out in us this tendency to anthropomorphize things. We imagine that our dogs think and feel quite a bit in the way we think and feel, for example, or maybe it's at the heart of animism. But when I work with Stable Diffusion, it feels really different from working with Photoshop, say, for example. It doesn't feel like a tool. It does feel more like a kind of collaboration. It doesn't feel sentient to me, per se, but it is unpredictable in the way collaboration with other humans is unpredictable. I remember when I was in college, I had this kind of game with this artist who had the studio next to mine, and I would start a painting and leave it in her studio. She would paint on it and put it back in my studio. We never talked about it. But that sort of ping pong back and forth is a little bit how it feels for me to put an image into Stable Diffusion and using the image to image version, not the text to image version, and playing with the settings. I don't quite know what's gonna come back. And I find myself getting drawn into hours-long sessions of experimentation and play. Yeah, so this is kind of what it's looking like in my studio right now. And with that, I'll pass and introduce Charles Traub chair of our MFA Photography, Video, and Related Media Department. Charles?
I'm not going to show a lot of slides and things. I'm just going to talk and ramble a little bit. Forgive me. You'll see up here our logo, the department logo, and it says Lens and Screen Arts. I feel very strongly that that's what we all do in some way or another, that the lens and screen arts, by arts I mean arts in the biggest sense, is the matrix for all of our discovery, whether in science, the humanities themselves, medicine, art, what have you. I cannot make these big separations from these fields anymore. The image is everywhere. The image is the thing that we need to know more about, where it's from, how it's generated, how it works, how we read it. Some people use the term, visual literacy. I like the term visual understanding, and we need to teach it. That's what art education should be about, in a sense. Not so much about the individual ego, but about how that ego, as Mark just said, works in collaborative ways to generate something new. I'm going to go to the next slide. This is a book I did with my colleague, Jonathan Lipkin, a former student and professor at Ramapo. We started this book in 1998. Excerpts were published in Leonardo in 99, and the book came out just at the time of 9/11. The whole purpose of the book, and I'm going to read to you just the 2 paragraphs from the introduction, because I think it's very pertinent to issues today. In the realm of the circuit begins with the premise that digital technology has value only as it reinforces the needs of our communities. This text was written as a response to colleagues, students, who were often unable to position their interest in the arts and humanities within the new context provided by the digital network and its technical stigmas. These people were often skeptical or uninformed or uninterested in the role of digital applications in further human discourse. Others, particularly students, delve into the new tides of the data set, surfing mindlessly through the proliferation of opportunities without discernment, and of which the need for meaningfulness is important. We can find meaning and purpose in the ongoing flow of our history and the evolution of ideas and relationship in the deep reservoir of possibilities enabled by new technology. At the Millennium Junction, back then, seems like forever ago, we are no longer anticipating a technological revolution. It has already taken place. This book outlines the dramatic implications that affect those who aspire to be creative during an age in which creativity is no longer limited by physical restraints. Much of the world has only limited access to what lies within the realm of the circuit. Nevertheless, we envision that the basic digital tools offer hope, democracy, and potential, which can help to level the disparities in our communities. Digital tools have simultaneously lowered the price and raised the level of creative exploration to the point that more people now have the access to these powerful means of expression. Because of the ease and seductiveness of the new programs, it is easy to think that one can master these new means of expression. But mastery lies not with the tool, but with what one does with that tool. Learning how to type does not make someone a writer. any more than learning how to use Photoshop makes one a photographer. That was 1998. I think all of it is pretty pertinent to our current discourse here. My interest in the arts is that the arts should humanize us. It should help us ask questions, maybe answer some, maybe direct us to other forms of looking. I'm talking about the visual arts, but also music and poetry and literature. And where we're failing, I think, in our art education is in the fact that we are not integrating what we do enough with the humanist interests, with the liberal arts that are dying in every university. And that, you know, the need to learn to adapt to technology and to learn the tools has overwhelmed that basic education that comes from our classic origins. Students are ahistorical by and large, everywhere. And we are lost that responsibility to inform them of what came before. We must use the technology to do that. The other thing that Jonathan Lipkin and I espoused in this is a textbook, by the way, Prentice Hall, and unfortunately it came out at a difficult time, but it's still available. Humanists, intellectuals, writers, others in our schools pushed away from the technology. Big Brother's going to watch you. Big Brother is manipulating you. I don't want any part of it. Well, then you're going to leave it to the techies, to the geeks. Then they're going to build the thing that you need to make sure is built with ethics and morality and legally responsible. So we have to embrace it. It's here. It comes, it keeps going, it will evolve, it will change us. I remember when we started the program, this program of ours, the Lens of Screen Arts, there was only two graduate programs, Fine Art, which existed as pretty much a painting and sculpture department, and a burgeoning computer arts program run by a man named Tim Binkley, who was a philosopher. And he understood that the computer ultimately offered issues for us that took it beyond just a mere tool, that if it was not embraced as a serious entity of creation, we were going to be in trouble. And I think that's partially why we're so anxious right now. We haven't embraced all the things that it can do and help us change, that we have to change to, with the developers, with the corporations, with the people. And more of us have tools to do that, actually. We're learning that. We try to inculturate to our students those tools for that reason. Let me just go to the last slide. I have so many, you see. These are some of the many publications that have come out of our department over the last, too many years. But these are the ones that have addressed technology and these issues of our human engagement with it. Being human is of particular interest because we did that, I think, in 95, 96, with the après-coup psychoanalytical program, which is also still connected with the SVA. Paula Miele and Mark Stafford were faculty members. And they deal with the culture of the technology as a problem, not of just learning externally what it does to our world, but internally, the psychological issues. And it's still very relevant. A couple of my students are reading it right now. Next in that line is the one I just mentioned, in the realm of the circuit. Adam Bell and I did a reader called New Vision, which is really mostly artists, but others who are talking about what the new technologies are doing in the arts and what the issues are. And that came out, what, Adam, 2016? 15. Seeing Science by Marvin Heiferman explores all the issues that the lens, the arts of photography, the art, I'm using the big term, big art, has to do with every other field, science in particular. And this book here, Bob Bowen's, is just about to come out from dealing with the stereoscopic vision and its technology. Natasha Chuk book is, who's here, and she'll talk about that later, I think. And lastly, the Millennium Film Journal, which is a publication that we work very closely with, is because Graham Weinbrand, the editor and publisher, is the editor, and it constantly deals with issues of technology and the making of creative, experimental, and small films. Lastly, I just want to posit something else. Two things, actually. In the Creative Interlocutor, we posited a new creative individual. We called that individual a creative interlocutor, a navigator of associative trails of thought and resources who enables others to freely and creatively manage their interests. This individual is one who is integrated. They're created I'm sorry. This individual is one who is integrated. Their creativity functions as an organic part of society. They act to connect for the common good. The creative interlocutor is also an integrator in the ability to negotiate the disparate fields of human knowledge and bring them together in previously unimagined ways. In so doing, they enable others to further their creative potentials. The creative interlocutor, a multimedia, universal designer, engineer, artist, socially responsible person whose mandate is to help negotiate the crossing of boundaries between different disciplines. While they reside in the field of technology itself, their parallels must be generated within the humanities and the arts. Thank you.
All right, so that was a great warm-up. I'll invite our fellow panelists on stage.
I need some technology. Where do you want?
Okay, please. All right. So just a reminder, we want to engage you in questions shortly, so please think of those, and we'll get to those with great enthusiasm. So thank you for the stage. This is going to be great. Yeah. And speaking of being here, I'd love to know who you are that are being here. So how about a quick show of hands? How many of you out there are current students, SVA or otherwise? Oh, excellent. That's fantastic. And how about faculty and staff? Even more. Maybe that's significant. That's great. What about other? Hands up if you're other.
All of the above.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. Well, this is going to be a lot of fun. I was making notes while all three of you were talking. I want to start off by saying I hope we encourage polite disagreement. There's nothing more boring than a panel where we all agree on everything. So, and especially with questions, if any of you take issue with things we say, and I hope you do, please don't hesitate to voice that. So first, an easy softball icebreaker question, I thought. Is the use of AI in art education a good or bad thing?
So,
I think that's maybe we need to rephrase the question because it's not simply black or white. AI is a tool like many other tools and unlike many other tools. As Hito Style has pointed out, I think there are fantastic applications for AI, and AI will really mean that we have breakthroughs in certain areas. And in the arts in particular, again, I would say we absolutely need to reflect on it and use it, make distinctions between using it as a tool and as a medium. It can be a terrific tool, it can be an amazing medium, and it can lead to all of the bad effects that we already discussed, or that even ChatGPT pointed out, lack of originality. Once again, going back to the mean, this is really at the core of it. You know, what it delivers is the mean. But I think arts always have been and need to be at the forefront of questioning that good or bad, and highlighting those issues and making proposals for counteracting it. And I don't want to instrumentalize the arts here. All of it is fine, and I think it's also fine to use AI as a tool in image generation as long as you're aware of how that functions within a context.
Well, and yeah, the awareness of how that functions has come up, right? But we maybe don't quite know. Maybe to Mark, because you brought up the question of collaboration. So maybe in the good or bad thing is
Exactly. Yeah. First I would say that our AI technology does affect different fields differently, even within the arts. I think it poses different challenges, say, for illustration and illustrators than it does perhaps for an interdisciplinary fine art or contemporary art scenario like where I'm teaching. But one of the challenges it poses for all of us, whether we teach in the arts or the humanities or the sciences, is intellectual or academic integrity or academic honesty, the question of plagiarism and attribution, which is one of the first things that one saw talked about in the mainstream media when ChatGPT was released last fall was, well, you know, we won't be able to tell whether a student wrote it or ChatGPT wrote it. And we're actually encountering that right now, as our students were just required to submit project statements in advance of their annual reviews. And we have a student who found it very helpful to work with ChatGPT to generate their statement. Someone who is neurodiverse and for whom, writing the kind of, producing the kind of language, the kind of writing that, that we reward and that we find most meritorious is a real challenge. Working with ChatGPT, they were able to write a text that really does the job well. And there's no doubt in my mind that they couldn't quite have written that without ChatGPT, but also that ChatGPT would not have written it without them, because it was very specific to them in their work. There was a process of prompting, getting results, feeding those results, some of those results back in, asking for adjustments, then editing the result, and then working with their mentor and instructor to then further revise. And initially I had asked them to highlight all the words that they had written and all the words that ChatGPT had written, and either put the words by ChatGPT in quotes or in italics or a different color, and then simply have a attribution, written by ChatGPT. It became very clear that that was impossible because they were fused together, that ChatGPT had touched, or almost all the language had passed through ChatGPT, but much of it was, first put down, many of the words by this student. So we decided just at the very top to say that, this text was written in collaboration
with ChatGPT?
Well, and collaboration, I think, is by definition nuanced in all of our departments. I know that was something that I instigated very consciously in my department. I only took over 6 years ago. And we have our past provost in the audience where he said, okay, great, you got the job, what do you want to do? And the first thing I said was, well, I want to change the name of the department, which in this collaborative sense is...
I've been trying to do that for...
Well, he's right over there. No, in my case, it was, no, the appropriate, the reason I bring it up was I wanted to add an S. So when I took my department over, it was MFA Computer Art, singular. And of course, with all these discussions, the reality is there is no art. There's so much collaboration, overlap. So just adding the S, I thought was both simple and significant. And that might be at the heart of this discussion, not so much about the technology, but do each of our fields look at collaboration in a different, more narrow or broad way?
All of our departments, yours, I'm sure, and other schools, we've all evolved in what we do and how we do it in regard to the technology. I remember when I went up to MIT in the mid-'80s and I saw the first viable graphic computer. I said, okay, that's it. I came back, and when I was asked to start this program in '88, I told the president, David Rhodes, who perfectly understood we have to start digitally. And he said, fine, do it. And a lot of my colleagues, people in the field said, oh, that's not going to happen for 50 years, you know. A couple of years later, they're all coming back. Can I take a course in your department? Blah, blah, blah. It's inevitable. Of course we're going to use AI. We're going to use it in many different ways. What is missing is, again, what I just sort of tried to get at, is we have to educate our students, ourselves, the community about the pitfalls, about the dangers, about the capitalism that's involved, and we have to do something to act with that. And we will in some ways, and we will fail in other ways. This symposium, all those books, the several symposiums like Being Human and the Culture of Interactivity, which we did at Rockefeller University back in the 90s, were all about these same issues. And we're moved forward, and we're doing it. And what is missing in our education is something called civics, not just at the college level, but at the very primary level. We don't teach those things that civics once prescribed to children anymore. Values, ethics, manners, procedures, democracy, how things work in neighborhoods, what they are. It needs to be an ongoing course that begins probably in preschool and goes all the way through college. And you'll be surprised how many business schools and law schools today do not teach civics or ethics. And that is where it has to start. We have to begin with what is good behavior, what is responsibility to the other, and it has to be taught at the very beginning of our educational processes, irrespective of what field one goes in.
Yeah, for better or worse, I would say AI really amplifies that issue and forces us to consider ethics, civics, democracy through all of its pitfalls. I think that's important. I also wanted to quickly return to some of the important points that Mark made in terms of collaboration, which I believe is very much key in these interactions with AI, and requires very different things in different fields, as you said. You know, there has been some writing about, oh, illustrators are going to be replaced, and the reality of it is that illustrators have to work in a very different way. They're using these tools, but in order to do something really outstanding, meaningful, you have to go back and forth and tweak, and that is the process of working with AI. The most problematic point, coming back to Hito Styles' excellent point, is that we are continuously being asked to conform to the machine and basically learn the algorithm, and that profoundly changes who we are.
Well, it seems like we have a bit of a consensus that on the trick question of is it good or bad is more accurately it's inevitable, right? And we want to embrace it and train our students in the proper way to do that. And speaking of timelines, that's come up a few times. Charles just mentioned it. I think one of our questioners mentioned, is this going to be bad in 10 years? Well, I think the reality is it's tightly entwined in our lives yesterday, and the acceleration of this is going to be happening on an asymptotic scale. I mean, next year is going to be radically different and even more obvious. So don't be confused into thinking this is something far off to think about. This is really something we're dealing with today, isn't it?
Just to engage with what you just said, Terrence, this rhetoric or logic of inevitability is one that I was trained one of which I was trained to be skeptical. Because the question is really what is inevitable, which is to say something is inevitable, right? But we, I think collectively more than individually, have some agency and responsibility to determine what comes next. And, artists in particular, but lots of us are able to, while we're being trained to participate in changing economies in different ways and to play different roles and, to habituate ourselves to, cloud computing, for example. At the same time, it's a very complex struggle or enmeshment between human activity and technology. And we don't use technologies in which the engineers and designers intended us to use them. And we, especially artists, like to use them in ways for uses for which they're not intended, and to turn them upside down and break them, and in so doing, influence then what comes next.
An anecdote just popped into my mind when you said that. I work a lot on feature films and movies and Hollywood stuff, and I remember calling into software support in Toronto, which was Alias before Maya existed, because I was having trouble, and I called up and I said, I'm having trouble doing this thing, and there was a pause from the guy who wrote the software and said, why would you want to do that? In other words, exactly to your point, you never know. So process. So we talked a little bit about collaboration and a lot about the next two panels topics, which I'm really looking forward to, about ethics and artistic. But what about process? So I thought we could talk a little bit about how you make art, how we make art, how our students make art, and does it matter? So is there any original art? It occurred to me that we look at these things as cheating, maybe because it's using all these sources that other people and places have originated, and it's a cheat. There's no originality coming through these AI tools. But maybe I'll put out, isn't that the case for any artist? If I make a drawing, it's the culmination of every museum I've ever been to, every art history book I've read, every fantastic professor that's informed me, the artists that I've collaborated with. So is even what I'm doing is original or not? So how different am I or any artist is other than AI? So maybe we talk about how that matters in education. Does the process matter? And that, of course, dovetails into the plagiarism and collaboration question.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, there is a long history, and there's precedent to that. The question of originality and authenticity and authorship has come up with every technology. Of course, photography it's not original, you just click a button. And we are very much able now to see where the artist's hand resides, and I believe that is the case for all kinds of technologies. Then there is the artistic influence in general. I think the trick is to really hone in on the specifics of every technology and how it changes those notions of authorship. So in the case of AI, we're working with massive data sets that create these mean images, and there is a certain kind of unpredictability, as you pointed out, which also makes it interesting. And at the same time, it's also predictable on the basis of what we're feeding those machines, what we will be getting out of them. And really getting attuned to that kind of language and positioning your artistic agency within that is the key, and what people need to learn. And just, you know, having a software generated image and declaring it to be a great piece of art by the AI, there were so many people involved, humans involved, in creating the algorithm, in creating the data sets, in feeding it, that you can hardly make those claims for AI authorship. So I think it's, once again, important to demythologize and unpack.
I think we will ultimately get some safeguards in terms of copyright or originality or some way of looking and seeing the stack. I remember, again, back in the 80s, late 80s, you know, oh, you'll never be able to watermark your easel, you'll never be able to protect them, you'll never be able to put your copyright. And, you know, I think a lot of artists, a lot of photographers have been enabled by being able to not have to deal with the establishment through the production of their work as well as the dissemination of their work and their economies. Yes, things will change. The nature of the field of photography has radically changed in terms of as a economic industry. I'm a still photographer. I do very little manipulation of anything. I'll just Photoshop and things like that very lightly. I'm a real world witness photographer, but I have embraced technology in every way because I see how it has enabled so many people to do things that would never have been able to do, and to disseminate information and the image as information into the world.
And it's a very recent phenomenon. You would know much better than I, but it was only a few years ago. I remember there was a very high-profile photo competition, whether it was the Times or the Geographic. And I think the photo was of a firefighter on a ladder, and it was responding to and it won the grand prize, and it was a big deal. It was a gorgeous, beautiful photograph. And then it was found out that it was very, very lightly, I think there was like a telephone pole or something in the lower right corner. And it was retouched. It was, and they didn't say that they retouched it, and they were, you know, the award was withdrawn, and it was a big, big deal.
Ed Keating of New York Times, wonderful photographer, was actually fired from the New York Times because somebody crossed the street and he missed the picture and asked him to recross the street, and some other photographer, and he took the picture, and some other photographers reported it, and you know, he was fired for that. So yeah, I mean, journalism has rules, and we have to have individual ethics about these things. We have to teach people, you know, where the boundaries are. And there are very fine lines that, you know, I would be presumptuous to try to define where those lines are, but that we can't be inhibited by by those limitations by moving forward and taking the risks that we have to do. Otherwise, we're going to remain crippled in a way by those who do it.
Yeah, fascinating. And even tangent topic about this is going to put illustrators out of work. This is going to put artists out of work. It wasn't more than a few weeks after ChatGPT went viral that a student, I believe from Stanford, used the same code to write an anti-ChatGPT, a detection algorithm basically that ended up being something like 95% accurate, to be able to analyze the semantics to say, nope, this was not written by a human. So here's a whole new industry that's going to be written, that's going to come up, and maybe our students will be out there pioneering some of that.
Yeah, and just as a quick footnote to that, this assumption AI is going to put artists out of work is coming from a perspective where you're relying entirely on the imitation game. imitating some style of art, something that looks like art. It does not apply to, for example, any of the art projects I showed, which are critically engaging with AI art, and that's, and with AI as a medium. So yes, if it's about playing the imitation game, even then I would not say it puts artists out of business. So many people always use the same line when they look at this AI-generated art. Oh, Coma and Melamed did that decades ago when they did their project, America's Most Wanted painting, and it was the lowest common denominator of what people might want to see, and that's what a lot of AI art looks like.
Just a quick, again, techno geek. I have the left and right brain very much, so I embrace that label, by the way. I believe one of our speakers mentioned the Lion. It's a nonprofit organization, LAION, which is the database aggregator of many of these data sets that are used in these tools. And they actually do publish the tags and the origination of these. So technically, you can actually go back into the stream and see the sources that were used for a lot of this art. Practically speaking, it's kind of how many of us actually read the the things we have to check mark when we load software. It's probably not going to happen. So AI education, have we already thought, I know I'm already going to be working with my staff and faculty to think about just this coming fall about how we need to nuance our curricula. Have any of you thought about this, practically speaking, about like in the fall when we come back, how we should teach differently with these AI tools being in our students' hands today? Have you already thought about that? What it would mean from a practical standpoint in the classroom? Maybe as Mark, I think, said, we've talked as chairs about just the plagiarism aspect. How do we're aware of it, how do we detect it? Do you just punish it, or do you get proactive about it, right? That's kind of how we've already started talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, those tools are not necessarily brand new. I mean, GPT has been around for a while, and yes, we have seen a flood of these text-based image generators now, but I have been using these tools in the classroom for some time, and I think it's important to embrace them. I also must say I'm so far less concerned about papers being written. Honestly, I have not seen anything good. If you're talking about a high school level of please summarize text ABC, yes, an AI can certainly do that. And the text will still sound very generic. You all know this from autocorrect. Autocorrect hates adjectives. I'm constantly being prompted and asked to eliminate adjectives, simplify. It always ends up on this very generic level. And my students have been using, in a media theory class, ChatGPT to ask questions about the topic, and fairly specific questions. So what can AI tools do for the Indian economy? And it's fairly embarrassing what comes back to that. So I'm really not that worried about it, and I think embracing the tools, really teaching how they work, and collaborating with them is important. There is this dangerous aspect of de-skilling too in the process. So many things in terms of writing, for example, that we needed to struggle with to learn. AI can help us with that, and that may be good in certain circumstances, and it may entail massive de-skilling in others.
And a de-skilling and a shifting of where we're skilled, right? So writing with ChatGPT really puts an emphasis on editing and on critically reading what it's generating and evaluating it, and So it's shifting the skill from maybe away from sentence composition and towards something else. And same thing with, the way that the lens in photography maybe reduce the centrality of being able to render figures and objects in nature with a kind of, realism. It's to answer your question, we don't have anything on the curriculum for next year. We do still have a workshop on called Art in the Blockchain, which I had an interesting conversation with the instructor, wondering if we should keep it on for next year. And there is still a lot of interest in the blockchain and NFTs. So, but I'm interested to see also how long it feels relevant to our students.
Similarly, we have nothing specific, but it's being dealt with in all of our basic classes as the students can learn how to do it. That's not the problem. The problem is, as I go back to, identifying that you did do it and what it means to have done it. Our current provost is putting together a panel of chairs, I think in 2 weeks, that we're going to kind of come up with a statement about what we feel is, I guess, ethical and proper for the university, for the college, and work on texts that we will publish for every student. Whether we'll come up with something good or not, I can't tell you, but I imagine we'll have a beginning of something. Maybe we'll go to ChatGPT and just ask them what they think.
I think we're talking about that next week. I think so, yeah. And it's really not any different from, my earliest memories of both art and math instruction was, don't just give me the answer, show me your process, right? I want to see your scratch paper. And that might not be easy. I just flashed to I have a amazing 11-year-old son who's just so brilliant in every way as a natural 10-year-old. But I don't know if it's an antithesis to his thought process. From his earliest years in school, I would tell him, where's your scratch paper? Don't just write the answer. I know you can do it in your head, but write it down so you can look at it and maybe it'll inform. So I wonder if this ends up being a generational thing with that, about not wanting to, I'm not going to go to the, not wanting to do the work, the lazy aspect of this whole cheating thing. I don't think it's that. I think it's, no, I can get the answer, so why should I bother, right? Going through the grind of providing all of the processes that I get there.
There's show your work, and I think there's also thinking critically about the process. So in math, it's, you show your work, right? But in art, maybe it's not just showing your work, but really paying attention to those steps and what's happening and where's the push and pull with the technology and reflecting on that and on its significance.
And I think this is, now that you mention it, something that has profoundly changed in the creation of AI art over time. So artists who have been working in this field for decades and still wrote their own software and their own expert systems at the time, they were really able to talk about all the details of how they created personalities and the weighting in the algorithms to create them. And today it very often happens that I ask younger artists questions about it, and they say, oh, I have no idea. I used this off the shelf, and the process is lost a little bit in this. And I think the process is one of the most interesting things. As Cito Style mentioned, obviously we're dealing very much with a black box problem in general, but there are white box programs out there, and I think looking at that and understanding the process and demythologizing and critiquing it is absolutely key.
Before we go on, I think I'd love to get some questions. So if you have some, I know we've started to tangent on a lot of different things. So if you have questions, make your way. Oh, there's a hand up already. Let's just start.
Thank you. My name is Wilson. I'm not an artist, and I have no idea about art, but I want to ask a question. It's more of a systems thinking theory that I use in my work. So how do you collaborate with other schools, like the climate schools, public health schools, to solve issues in the climate crisis, COVID, so that your students have the critical thinking skill to understand and use art and AI to solve problems? Thank you.
So the question was, how do we collaborate with other schools with AI specifically or in general ways?
I mean, as you said, you use AI as a tool. Like, there's a climate crisis coming up, and you can use art and AI to collaborate with, climate school to motivate, people to buy maybe solar panels. That kind of collaboration system thinking I'm talking about, yeah. So how do you collaborate with other schools? Maybe with the business schools, the climate school, medical schools, because art is a way of encouraging or nudging people to do stuff.
Yeah,
for sure.
I would say this is actually naturally happening on so many levels. So one thing we haven't talked about specifically, and thanks for bringing that up, there is, of course, a whole area of art. First of all, art science practice, and then also activist art and environmentally activist art, artists who are using AI tools and all kinds of technologies for addressing those issues. And they are working with organizations, with institutes, be it on issues of climate change, etc. So artists are really finding a lot of ways into that. I also see among students that they are very interested in it. And I think this is probably the case at any school. I can only speak for the new school. There are multiple labs within the school or, of course, around the city that we have relationships with. We have a climate project, and yeah, students would collaborate with them. But in general, I see a lot of that happening and a lot of interest in it. I think the generation I'm teaching right now is very much focused on that. I also want to, as a kind of disclaimer, I also want to say that I do not want it to put on art to solve problems per se. I think art also is a valid form of knowledge production without putting its problem-solving hat on.
So art as an instigator more than a problem solver.
Well, just I'm very careful about it because this gets into funding issues, and I think in the US in particular, you encounter this instrumentalization of art in order to prove its validity and raise funds for it, and I think that's a very dangerous trap because I see a value in art per se.
Charlie or Mark?
Your point is very well taken. It's very easy for, the science class to say, well, let's get an artist come in and teach our people how to do art rather than, but we don't fund the art class, particularly in high schools and junior highs. But I think all responsible schools have programs that outreach to communities and to people, and I think it's also up to those schools to say, other schools or other places to say, come on, do you have somebody that can teach us this? Yes, I do. And we always get volunteers, we always get people to do it. We've worked with, for 3 summers with foster kids from the Children's Aid Society. We taught them computers in the summer, how to work with the computer to make a book about documenting their lives. Very successful project. Again, the funding for it became the problem, but we did it for 3 summers and it was very, very successful in teaching inner city foster kids. So, I mean, I think everybody wants to do that. The economics of it are difficult, but also there's the sublimation of, well, you're an artist, you can teach us this, and, what you do isn't really important. We just want your techniques, and that you're right about, absolutely right about that.
I have nothing to add.
You got nothing. Well, I'll take. I'll try to take maybe it's a slightly counterpoint from Christiane's mention about the importance of artists in solving problems. I would posit that the artist's role is absolutely critical in illustrating, communicating, and ultimately solving problems that may be technology-based or based in anything. I've always been fascinated by information visualization, as an example. You know, the way that a designer can illustrate pure numbers on a spreadsheet can radically inform how you read those numbers and how you interpret them. And of course, then the danger is which way do you push the interpretation, right? So how to actually inform the viewer.
We're in agreement here. I think a lot of art does that naturally and has been at the forefront of doing it. What I'm concerned about is putting that as down as the goal for art, and that's the only legitimate way.
I'll take the bait.
Excellent.
I really appreciated your question. So there's a couple of countervailing tendencies broadly when we think about art and its value, and one is to think about how it can help us communicate or solve problems, for example, and the other is this idea that emerged sometime in the modern era. It might be the 19th or early 20th century, art for art's sake. Art not as a means to an end, not as something instrumental, as an instrument to achieve a goal, but more as some kind of end in itself. I'm somewhere in between, honestly, and I do think, though, what might distinguish art, the kind of art that I do and teach, from, say, design on the one hand, or communications or propaganda on the other, is that it's often not about communicating an idea or even telling a story or solving a problem. Design often solves problems. Artists more often make problems, or doesn't often answer questions. More often it asks them. And sometimes what it does best, I think, is address, sometimes not through words, but through non-linguistic or non-verbal aesthetics, through experience, like aesthetic experience, what something is like, what it feels like to be where we are right now. I'm a little reluctant to say what it's like to be human, because that has this kind of flattening, universalizing thing, because there's so many different kinds of human experience, but that's what I want to sort of hold space for, is that usefulness of, that can be very fulfilling, I think, of making subtle and sometimes ambiguous meaning through aesthetic experience.
Well, and I think always not to just if you're talking about the more general, like empathy, right? If connecting empathetically with a problem or with a potential solution, I think that's what art definitely does, right?
And yeah, I think Mark put that much better than I did, and it was what I was trying to say, this point of what was it like. I think for me, looking back at art of a certain kind of time, that tells me so much better what it was like at that time and how people related to the world than any history book can. And I see that as a profound value in art.
That's interesting. I just flashed to ask Charlie. Oh, you look at so many very, very, very early, late 1800s photographs, and nobody's smiling. No, very stoic.
They had to sit still for a long time.
Does that mean that nobody was happy in the 1880s? Clearly.
Oh, no, that's not at all. I mean, this is the history. That's precisely what I mean. It tells me about the history, what painting meant at the time. It tells me something about patronage. It tells me something about how people related to the creator. That's what I mean. Not that people aren't happy.
Let's have another question. This is great. Oh, we've got a couple of hands up over there. Go ahead. Green shirt. You can take the mic out of the thing if you'd like to stand up.
Okay. Hi. Well, First, thank you, because this is like a great symposium, and this is a chance to see my former professor, Christiane Paul, from the New School, at a course that was amazing, curating digital art. And we were talking about AI and illustrators and artists, but I wanted to know, what's your take on AI and art curators? And as an art curator, would you see yourself co-curating an art exhibition with an AI? And how do you see yourself, how do you envision this potential collaboration? And is there any project taking place right now in this field? Thank you.
Yeah, there have been various attempts at AI or software curation. Actually, Mark knows that too since the 90s. You know, there were some early softwares that tried to play with that. And of course, that has also advanced further. And I'm very interested in that kind of collaboration. I have not done it as an exhibition. One of my colleagues, Patrick Lichty, actually has done it and had a fully AI curated show that everybody can print out. What we have done at the Whitney Museum is experiment with that. So the artists Übermorgen, together with Leonardo Impet from the Max Planck Institute and Joshua Cruiser, a curator, actually created a project. The next biennial will be curated by a machine, and we fed the AI data sets from the Liverpool Biennial. They were our co-commissioner, and the Whitney Museum. And you can access this online at artport.whitney.org. So you have 64 universes of a software curating the next biennial. And it was super interesting to see, to basically have our curatorial cultural biases reflected back to us. In some universes, the AI is so woke, gendering every space, and it's super interesting in terms of the outcome. What was also really interesting in terms of co-curation, Liz from Übermorgen early on said, look guys, I don't like how this sounds. This is so dry and so flat and so boring. What can we do about that? And we sat down for hours and discussed what we could do to spruce it up, and ended up feeding the software, and it was GPT-3, I think, Rolling Stone magazine, in order to change the language a little bit, you know. So that just as one example of co-curating kind of through an artist commission. Another project I want to note in that context, also done for the Whitney's Artport site, was by Devin Kenny, who fed the AI installation images at the museum over the past few decades. And then Devin looked at the letter archives of the museum and basically built parallels between a museum as a kind of controlling software and machine in terms of discourses with art, and those GAN-based installation images and creating collages from them.
Great question.
And there was a Hungarian biennial, I think, curated by an AI recently.
Can I just riff on that question? Because what I've been thinking about is to what extent we might think of the algorithms that pick what we see in, for example, Instagram or TikTok as a kind of, as an answer to your question, right? It's a kind of AI curation. It's not the same as selecting works of art for a biennial in a museum, but and that sort of had me thinking about how what these algorithms are optimized for. ChatGPT, one way of thinking about it is as a way of predicting what might come, like the next word, and that's how it strings, I think, the text together, is through this sort of statistical prediction by looking at what often comes next. That's also how autocomplete, I think, works in a lot of the software we use, finishing sentences for us or finishing queries. And I think it's also how things like TikTok and Instagram what is most likely to lead somebody to click or to stick or to watch, and what's going to maximize engagement. It's optimized for that because, unfortunately, they have an advertising-based revenue model. So, a really important question is, what do we optimize these AIs for when we use them? And unfortunately, we rarely have agency over that. Like, there really isn't, I don't have any access, I don't think, to getting inside and tweaking the phase of the model in, say, Stable Diffusion, where it decides, how it makes basically decisions as it goes through its iterations. And that would be really cool. I mean, I guess what I would have to do is partner with, a PhD student somewhere, or get somehow, into collaboration with Google, as some of my peers do. I guess I tend to be more of somebody who likes to see what you can do as a casual user than sometimes getting down to the level that, say, Harold Cohen did in building one's own tools.
Well, you get to the point of the inherent bias again, right? Because unless you have some kind of AI where you have to prompt it with something to instigate, in this case, the curation, right? And if you just say, well, out of the 362 artists that want to be part of this biennial, pick me 12. Is that curation? Not really, right? That's just random selection. So then what keywords do you give it to lean it towards, right? And then so who are you, more woke, less woke, all the terms, all
we
the
want more woke.
Right. Well, yeah, or not.
I hope that more curators use it, but put in the right words, and that we reach beyond what in all these fields of art are a kind of a canon, or the usual circles, or the usual suspects of the art world or the photo world, and that it reaches out from this database that's already there into all the new possibilities that are out there. And I think it has the potential to do that. If you really look at, particularly in my field, the education of most of the curators is all the same. The same schools, the same programs, and same legacy. And, the tie to the art world, meaning the gallery world, is too tight. And we need to break that for the future of art itself, and for emerging people.
Yeah, but here's the point. In order to do that, you really need to change the database and the algorithm, because it's, because it's, obviously the AI will...
That's why we got to talk to the people generating.
Talk to our curation colleague
things.
Graduate department. Oh, here we go.
The provost.
Another question. Yes, the man who added the S for me.
That was easy.
It was easy, thank you.
An observation and a question. This is wonderful, really wonderful, and which prompts the observation. Increasingly, it's not loud enough?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yep.
Increasingly, the A in AI is troubling me, because I don't think it's artificial, as I understand it. It's aggregated intelligence. And I always think that in my head, and when I start there, I get right to Hito Sterl's problems from the beginning, rather than having to make my way through an artificial maze to see what's actually happening, or at least what seems to me to be happening. That may be very low end. I mean, I may have a very low ceiling for what could happen, and I leave that to you. But the question, last month, a colleague here, younger, who I really like, tried to make me more optimistic. I think I was focused on the future of illustration at that moment in time, but he said that he saw a great professional future for prompt engineers. That the new problem, the new profession that we could make a department for, help people achieve, is knowing how to give the program the right information. And that, that sounded at best like a community college degree program. I don't know. I mean, it certainly didn't stimulate me. But at any rate, I leave that to you.
Well, it's a great observation and question. I tried to hint at that with my illustrations of my horse, which, I need to take that course about how to be better at prompting these things.
Yeah, and we haven't, thanks for bringing that up, because we haven't really talked about it. That's already a flourishing industry. There are the websites you can purchase the prompts from, so there is already this kind of economic substructure to this, which is highly problematic, of course.
Yeah, and it's not trivial or superficial at all. I mean, the thought processes that go into, even, again, just when I typed, a downward angle, a certain lens, a certain kind of lighting, and just using those words make a big difference. And that's where we come back as educators. We had, I think, another question on this side before. Do we still have someone? Please step up. And then over here.
Hello. We've been discussing a lot about originality, authenticity, and plagiarism, but not so much like on the personal integrity. As artists, we all have our own personal ethics and ethos. And kind of to point back to the conversation about showing our work, we generally share like the general medium, like oil on canvas, but in other mediums, such as photography, we're not expected to share, we use this camera, this lens, this lighting, and such. As purveyors of magic, essentially, we never really want to reveal our hand. But is it different with AI? Is our integrity as artists compromised by not sharing that an idea was composed of AI, or some of its execution?
It's a great question. I'll answer it from the museum end, because we face that issue all the time, and you're absolutely right. We would never note the camera on a photograph. But we ask super specific questions when it comes to software. And it would indeed be noted what you used and how you used it, even if it's not the top end of the medium line. You would, if we would acquire your work, you would get a long questionnaire with very detailed questions, and all those categories and subcategories would actually make it in the database. And I personally, as a curator, really want to know, without being overly technical, what the process was. Yeah.
I'm actually looking forward to what my students come up with to address this. So the ways in which you share your influences, right, and how you use tools, and as I mentioned, as my students have already, as I'm sure yours have as well. But the process about how that's shared and how it's communicated, I'm going to leave to my students. I think I look forward to what they come up with.
I'm sort of dealing with that question right now as I prepare to show those lab pictures that I showed earlier. And the answer comes a little bit in sharing different information in different places. So the object label or the checklist might say, ink and acrylic on canvas, or on polyester. But then in the short statement that I'm asked to provide, and that will then be edited by a curator, that's where I might decide to reveal a little bit more about how it's made. But I also share that reticence you described about lifting up, opening up the box too much, because I just think it's maybe a little distracting from what I'm most interested in. I don't think it matters all that much, probably, whether I'm using Stability, Diffusion, or Dream Studio. But, I mean, if somebody asked, of course, I would say. But yeah, it's about what information you decide to foreground, I think.
Yeah, it depends on the concept of the work, and how much knowledge do you need for determining that concept. Another thing, just footnote, we haven't talked about much, is that there are also profound differences between those softwares. Many artists have been saying Midjourney is by far the most poetic of the three in terms
softer,
of the language.
Softer, yeah.
All pictures made on the cell phone.
Well, and what we're talking about too is I was just in some galleries in San Francisco, and I brought up with my partner the question that gallery people who attend galleries. I'd love to hear your Christiane about this. Whether or not an artist exposes more information or not, even just in the labeling. So one gallery we went to, there was no labeling at all. There was just the art on the wall, and I commented that, well, sometimes I like to read the little thing. Yeah, it's oil on canvas, but it's. And you'd like to know who did it. Yeah, well, who did? Well, yeah, who did it? Why they did it? What the location was? This was more metadata basically about the thought process behind the location of the time it was done, which gives you context or not. And I think this is what you were both talking about a little bit about. Does it matter or not? But that's more fundamental. And we have another question.
Yeah, so maybe a statement and then a question. So statement is, I think, for those of you like looking to figure out how how to look at AI for your students. Consider that there are deeper ways to train the model. Like the prompt is just one level, but there, in things like GPT-4, you have fine tuning, and so you can expect your students to actually go a little deeper. Maybe fine-tune the model for their personality. My dad's up there, so one of the things that we often talk about is that the photograph has sort of never been more important, and maybe the photographer never less important. So I guess my question is more art better? Because you're about to have a proliferation of it. And also just want to comment, it's good to see exactly 4 professors on the stage.
It can count. You wanna take that, Dad?
I don't think Dad should answer that. That's.
I had that note.
Go ahead.
Well, I had that note written down as democratization earlier, and the point of when we review applications, we just at SVA we just finished. Reviewing our applicants for the next coming fall. And will we suddenly get 100 times more applicants? Because I had this discussion with, maybe it was you, Charlie, we had lunch. I think there exist individuals maybe sitting here today who don't self-identify as artists, who maybe wanted to be artists, but they ended up being forced into being accountants or doctors or something, but at their core, they're artists, they're creative types. And do these tools now expose the ability in a lot more people to express themselves artistically? And then is that valid? That gets back to our original question of, is how the art made valid? So it's a great question about, are there going to suddenly be many, many, many more quote unquote artists that, they don't know how to oil paint. I can't use watercolors, but boy, I can sure be a great prompt person.
Well, I haven't seen it yet. I don't expect to see that, and I'm not talking about the number of applicants, but I'm deeply skeptical when it comes to generating more meaningful art, because once again, playing this imitation game, a lot of it just isn't very interesting. And if you start using the prompts and the software in interesting conceptual ways, yes, but that means you would have been a great conceptual artist anyway. If you have that level of thinking and criticality, it doesn't matter anymore if you're using stable diffusion or cardboard or whatever it is, you will probably come up with something interesting. But to the very general question, are we going to see a proliferation of art in general? Maybe, and that's great. I think the more art, creativity, images are out there, that's great, and the more people creatively express themselves, I think it's something that is not valued enough.
It makes me think about how quantitative shifts, like scale shifts, sometimes have qualitative effects. And that's just something I've been thinking about in art in general as the world population increases and more and more, a larger and larger percentage of that population is far enough out of desperate poverty that art becomes an option. And as people become more and more interconnected and have more and more access to various tools, although I think you can make art with, a stick in the sand, there's just so much more art now than ever before. And we have so much more visibility or awareness of it as artists that it does change, I think, the ecosystem, if you will, a kind of cultural ecosystem in which we operate in qualitative ways that are hard to understand.
Thanks, son. Difficult question, but I have some potential answers for me, any personal. Frankly, I don't know what art is anymore. And I don't like any of the terms that we use. Conceptual, all good art is conceptual artists, real-world witness artists, fine artists. I don't know what they mean anymore because the context in which we view things, who's viewing it, and why it's being viewed, as well as these influencers or these authorities say what it is, culture, time, evolution will change a lot of things. And I also think just because you're an artist and you say it's art, I don't believe it. I think there are many other factors which determine that. And teaching people to be creative, which I hope is what we're all doing, teaching them to think visually, to understand visually, is going to produce important, lasting imagery that may or may not ultimately hang on a wall or be considered art. I don't know how to make that definition anymore.
Well, and I think it's a direct comparison to other major media, filmmaking, computer graphics, photography. It was not so long ago. Those tools were extremely expensive and very complicated to learn and use. So there were very few number of people who used film cameras, computer graphics, and even photographs. But of course now, there's trillions of photographs being taken every day. Does that make more applicants to our photo department, or are there more photo galleries out there? I don't think so. Yeah. But less photographers with jobs. Sure, yeah.
So I would like to share some of my thinking because I also graduated from the MFA from the SVA. So I'm very proud of, we have this discussion. And this is the question I've been thinking about and I work on the project for the last 5 years. So it's something I'm really excited to share the thinking and also ask a question about. So from this ChatGPT, I did pay a lot of attention to it. And I do know, some of the schools start to ban it, in the school because the students cheating. But my point is, why can't we just ask students, just cheat as much as you can, show me how far you can go, just cheat it, do everything you can to use the machine, do, best job, why not, that's my point. I think, that's how the tool, technology, how every generation, how it goes, right? So, and the other question I was asking about, from that question, I'm trying to ask, what can go wrong? What actually can go wrong? But the second question I was thinking about is about this education system. As I can see, how the technology develops so fast, but every subject, and for example, law, let's not talking about art, but law, because the technology happens so quick, the law definitely is so behind, when I look at this, a virtual world, the computer game basically is like a killing, it's okay, it's not illegal, right? but what if, you do something, in the virtual world? Is that against law? No, we don't have question for that. And that is also something, art can address and raise the question about, So I also thinking about, okay, the whole education system, it's developed like when I look around, it's just not right how it is. And so that's why I'm so proud of SVA today, discussion about this education and art, where we are heading to. When the technology heading to where you're heading to now, what the education need to change? Like why the system still stay the same, in the every, subject, every major, why they still stay there? So what is, who need that protection? For example, when the Airbnb come out, hotel needed protection. When the Uber come out, taxi needed protection. So now, in the education system, who need that protection? Why we can move forward, with all these things happening in our world, why we are in school, in high school, in primary school, in college, we are still learning something. It's just so not really connect to the current world.
Well, just the fact that you brought that up and thank you for the shout out to SVA. I'd like to think we have also very good sister organizations out there, but it is on the students as well as the faculty to question, to challenge, to not be complacent with this at all. And I think we had some quick chuckles instantly when you said about some places might be banning ChatGPT, which is just
unnecessary.
It's also impossible and it's stupid. It's just it's just not possible and not the right way to go. But I think your point, and if we do want to wrap up, that might be a great way of finishing it. That I had made a note earlier to wrap up. One of the names of one of these software tools that we've mentioned a lot is Midjourney. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was kind of appropriate that what we're talking about now, this isn't the end of anything. We don't know the answers, right? We don't know what we don't know, how I started. But so I think talking about Midjourney is where we are. And you've all joined us now in that conversation.
Yeah. I just want to, excuse me one second. Yeah. I just want to mention that I know you're all tired, you want to get lunch. There are lots of good restaurants in the way. We have some sandwiches for some of the people here. That said, we have a great panel coming up at 3 o'clock, which is going to address a lot of the legal, ethical, moral, other issues, cultural issues of this with wonderful people. So I hope all of you will return.
And I actually wanted to say something about your question because you brought up so many important issues, and I wanted to again point to the history. So what you're bringing up here right now specifically with the law, and I think that may be a good transition, not new at all. This is what we've been discussing for 30 years. I encourage you to read Lawrence Lessig's book about that. What has been happening in virtual worlds, trials about one's dog being poisoned. Many of you, or some of you may remember the rape in Lambda Mu that happened ages ago. And it was artists and people like us who staged a tribunal for solving those issues. It became at least part of the history and written record and push for more laws in those areas. And I also think maybe the issue to your first issue about GPT being banned, I so often feel that this is misrepresented in the media because all of the educators I talk to in universities also find it fairly ridiculous. And I gave the assignment that you mentioned to my students in media theory, please use the software to write your paper, push it as far as you can, be really complicated, and we see it fail, left and right. There's nothing good coming out of it so far.
I think, right now, artists, we kind of using, technology when it's come out, right? In other words, I think we probably should encourage students and artists to actually talk to those developers, to know, okay, I need this tool, I actually, want this, just go as far as you can, be ahead of the tech, be ahead of, everything, try to raise the question, not only the, thinking part, also, like technology part.
Well, and Charlie brought that up in his opening remarks, I believe, is that don't say, I don't want to deal with it, and the geeks will write it. We want to be part of that and be part of the process, part of the solution. I think we want to wrap up. Yeah. If we have any other closing remarks, if we don't, thank you for coming, be part of the solution.
Thank you.
Thank you, students. Come back at 3 o'clock. Don't miss it. Thank you, everybody.